How's everybody doing? This is Christopher McFarland, the host of the Red Enigma Movie Review Podcast. And tonight, I'm not going to talk about any specific movie. Instead, I'm going to discuss a specific year, particularly a year that I feel is a great year for film history. And plus, it happens to be the year of my birthday. But uh, nevertheless, there's so many movies. There's a good amount of movies that came out in 1980 that are special to me, but I can only mention 25. So, because we only have 30 minutes, so we'll go ahead and get to that and try to move as fast as we can. Number one, of course, I'm going to do this in alphabetical order, so you'll get the point. You'll get um, all right. Number one is going to be Airplane. Still one of the funniest movies of all time. The jokes, so many of them, but the best parts of it are the more less obvious stuff, like the sound of the jet plane for the airplane, or you know, people wearing navy suits while they're in the air force, just stuff like that. Watch the movie if you haven't seen it already, and I will soon be talking about it on another episode. So far, 5 out of 5 fingers. Another one, Alligator. Um, at first, it just seems like another Jaws ripoff, but this one's very well written, and it's pretty funny. It's pretty effective, and it's got great character actors in it. Although I don't recommend this as much as Piranha in terms of Jaws ripoffs, it's still highly recommended. I give it 4 out of 5 fingers. Um, Next, we'll have the Blues Brothers, the 1980. Well, everybody I imagine knows about the Blues Brothers. In spite of it being a bit overlong and a headache at times, I do dig the musical scenes, and the car crash scenes are pretty cool. So there you go. So yeah, Blues Brothers would be 4 out of 5. I dig it. It's check it out if you haven't. Next would be Bronco Billy, which is one of Clint Eastwood's most underrated films. A little more lighthearted than the usual fare, but it's definitely worth checking out. And it's slightly better than any which, well, maybe a little more than slightly better than Any Which Way You Can, which also happened to come out in 1980. Um, and that one was okay, of course. I'm a big Clint Eastwood fan, so I tend to be maybe a bit more biased than I should be when I come to certain movies of his. Next, we're going to go to Cannibal Holocaust, one of the most controversial and, in my opinion, one of the greatest horror movies of all time. It still it still has that ability to shock, maybe not in the same way, but let's just say it's a lot more effective than the movie that ripped it off, the Blair Witch Project. That to me was nothing but overrated drivel, but that'll be for another time. After that, we got Cheech and Chong's next movie. Not quite as funny as Up in Smoke, but it does show that the two stoner geniuses have not lost their luster and grown stale yet. It's definitely worth checking out. Next is City of the Living Dead, directed by the great Lucio Fulci. Um, One of the zombie movies that he did. This was around the peak years when zombie made him more, I would say, let's say he found his niche with that. Next, we will go to Cruising, that's starring Al Pacino, directed by Billy Friedkin, the guy who directed The Exorcist and that French Connection movie. This movie had gotten a lot of controversy back in the day for basically being politically incorrect and portraying homosexuals in a negative light, which I really don't think it does. Not really. I mean, no more than Will and Grace does. I mean, yeah, it's in a way a gay slasher, but it's actually a pretty effective movie. And Pacino doesn't disappoint, and Paul Sorvino, definitely one of my faves as well, doesn't disappoint either. He's the captain, of course, and I'll talk about cruising on another episode. Next up is Dress to Kill, the 1980 classic directed by Brian De Palma and stars Michael Caine and Angie Dickinson and Nancy Allen. Um, has one of the greatest slashing scenes ever. It's very glossy. It's almost like an American giallo, the Italian crime thrillers with a bit of slasher elements. It's not my favorite De Palma movie, but I still like it and I still recommend it. Everybody should check it out. Next up, we got The Exterminator. Um, it is a classic exploitation. It definitely has its following. It definitely has great moments. The things that may be its detriment are certain scenes go on for a bit too long, and the scene involving like a possible romantic moment with the lead guy that isn't the exterminator just seems kind of forced and really goes nowhere. I feel if they would have cut 10 minutes of this movie, this would have really been, I think it would have been even more revered as a cult classic. But nevertheless, I definitely recommend checking it out because it does, especially at the beginning, have some really effective moments. Next up, we're going with The Fog, the follow up to John Carpenter. Well, sorry, John Carpenter's follow up to Halloween. No, no, it's not a sequel or anything like that, but it's the next horror movie that he had made since then. While it's no means the classic of Halloween, it's definitely effective when it wants to be, especially the scenes involving the crew from the fog and the killings, which are bloodless but very effectively done. And the light, let's just say, check out the fog. It definitely has its moments. It's not perfect, and it may not grab you every single moment, but it's definitely not a disappointment. Check it out. Next up is Heaven's Gate, the 1981 notorious flop from Michael Cimino with Chris Christopherson and Christopher Walken. I really I admire this movie. Yes, it is flawed. It's basically like an almost hour Western art movie with a budget that obviously went way over budget, but it's a ballsy movie and I actually quite enjoy it. And I think time has been really kind to it. And of course, like the rest I will talk about in a future episode, which is four. I would give Heaven's Gate 4 stars. Oh yeah, I give that to The Fog, Exterminator, Dress to Kill, and City of the Living Dead. And Cruising would get 4.5 stars. Sorry about all that, and we'll catch up. The next movie I have is called Humanoids from the Deep, a underrated cult classic from Roger Corman. is probably one of the bloodiest and most violent movies Roger Corman did up until that time, and still one of the best ones at 80 minutes long. It packs in a lot. It's definitely worth seeing if you're into grindhouse exploitation. 4.5 stars, not quite up there with Piranha and Death Race 2000, but it's my third favorite. It's still great. Next up is The Idolmaker, starring Ray Sharkey, a very underrated, overlooked film about basically an idol maker. I'll have to talk about that one sometime soon. Um, let's just say it's definitely an unsung movie that definitely deserves rediscovery. Next up is Invasion of the Flesh Hunters, which has another title called Cannibal Apocalypse, which stars John Saxon and Giovanni Radici, I believe his name. I hope I got that right. I would say this is probably his best movie, and John Saxon is no slouch in it himself. It's like a cannibal zombie. It's, let's just say it's worth checking out. As Cannibal Apocalypse or Invasion of the Flesh Hunters, Italian horror movies seem to love changing the titles around a lot. Next up is Maniac, which is a great, gritty horror film, not for everybody. Surprisingly, not a video nasty, but it's effective where it needs to be. It doesn't have a bunch of unnecessarily character development. Let's just say, it's not, doesn't have ridiculous teens, and it's not Friday the 13th type stuff. I mean, to be honest, that's a me. Now we'll talk about Friday the 13th. Now we get to Motel Hell, which is another underrated cult classic, which to me has gotten better with time. I mean, the movie isn't near as bloody as some people would make it out to be, but it's definitely gruesome. I mean, the subject matter really doesn't need a bunch of bloodletting, although it's got a really cool chainsaw scene at the end of the movie. Um, if you haven't heard of Motel Hell, I'll do a review on that in the near future. It's definitely worth checking out. Um, and we'll move on. The next film is definitely, if there's any movie that really deserves the title unsung, overlooked, unknown, it's this movie here, Night of the Juggler, starring James Brolin. It, it's a great, I mean, it's a major film. It was released by Columbia Pictures, but it's still very, let's just say, it really captures New York City the way a lot of big movies can't. I mean, it's a bit more polished than, say, like Exterminator, but it's definitely worth checking out, and it's never dull. It's, you know, action just galore. Got a good chase scene, too, and sleazy, so I think it would definitely appeal to the grindhouse crowd as well. Next up, we got The Ninth Configuration with Stacy Keach, and it was written by William Blatty and directed by William Blatty, the same guy that wrote the Exorcist book. And this movie's like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest on acid and then some. It's definitely worth checking out, especially the bar fight scene, which is probably one of the most unnerving scenes in cinema history. Yeah, it's a great movie. Oh yeah, I did it again. This movie definitely deserves 4.5 stars. Um, Idolmaker, Humanoids, 4.5. Idolmaker 4, Invasion 4, Maniac 4.5, Motel Hell 4.5, Night of the Juggler 5 out of 5 fingers. As I said, it's definitely one of my top 40 favorites and a real classic movie that needs to be rediscovered. And Ninth Configuration will be at 4.5 fingers. Next up, of course, is Raging Bull, which, I mean, come on, there's no way that I was going to leave this movie out. I would say it's my fourth favorite Scorsese movie. I'll tell you the others at another time that are above it, but let's just say it's like the opposite end of the same coin with Rocky, where one's about an underdog, another is about basically a bully who, you know, that's the thing about De Niro. This is the thing I liked about De Niro back in the day. He was really good at playing people that were really pieces of shit or people that just were unhinged or they just were screw ups. And we'll get to that at another time. The next movie is called Seems Like Old Times with Chevy Chase, Goldie Hawn, and the late Charles Grodin. This movie, I would say, actually holds up very well. Like yeah, it's kind of silly, but when I see it now, it works. I like the music in it, and just I would say it was one of the top 5 best movies with Chevy Chase. But Charles Grodin was really good in this too. So and Goldie Hawn, of course. And let's see. Oh yeah, the dogs. They're wonderful in it as well. I would definitely recommend checking out a likable kind of PG rated comedy called Seems Like Old Times. Next up, The Shining. I mean, what can I say about this movie that hasn't been already said? You know, I know that Stephen King apparently did not like the movie, and I could see why. I mean, The Shining is a great book. Yes, I can read and I've read it. And it works as a book, but I think it works better as a movie. And I think Jack Nicholson makes a more compelling Jack Torrance. I like the fact, now some might not, that the guy seems pretty unhinged to begin with. You know, he doesn't really change throughout the movie. It just more gets brought out as the movie goes on. And it's one of those movies that has more questions than actual answers. And, when it first came out, it only did modest business and reviews were kind of mixed. But over time, it's gotten a lot of more positive feedback, and it seems like everybody's seen it and heard of it. And it's definitely worth the 5 out of 5 fingers. I mean, every time I watch it, it still gets me. I still am engrossed by it. Next on, we're going to move to a film that not everybody knows, but it's definitely a cult hit. It is called The Stuntman, and it is one of my favorites, along with many on here. And it's one of Peter O'Toole's best movies. It is a Chinese puzzle of a movie. Nothing is what it seems. One minute it seems like it's a drama. Next thing it seems like a thriller. Then next thing you know, the scene turns funny. You just got to watch it to know what I'm talking about. It's definitely worth checking out. It's definitely goes on to the beat of its own drum. There's a lot more to it than what the title would suggest. It's, let's just say, it's not like the Hooper movie, which is about a stuntman. It's Burt Reynolds movie. It's nothing like that. It's entirely different, but we'll get into that another time. The next film is called Superman 2, which in some ways I think is even better than the first one. And of course, it's known now that Richard Donner, I think, directed most of it, and the more goofier aspects of it were directed by Richard Lester. But I like this movie. I think it's a great sequel. I thought Superman 1 was impressive, and I thought Superman 2 was impressive. I saw the Donner version, and it's good, but I like Superman 2. I grew up with it, and I still am. I like it. You know, it's colorful and it's entertaining. Next movie on the list, and it's the last of the 25. Oh, yes, Superman 2 is 4 stars, 5 stars for the stuntman. Hey, I'm getting better. Bear with me. The next film and last on the list is called Used Cars with Kurt Russell and directed by I'm sorry, Robert Zemeckis. He went on direct Roger Rabbit and Forrest Gump and all that stuff. And this was a comedy he did that I don't think many people at the time really got into, but it has really grown into, it has gained a hell of a following over time. And it's pretty damn hilarious. I mean, I would say it was one of Kurt Russell's best movies. And Jack Warden was great and hilarious, as always, as well as the supporting cast, which I'll get into later. I definitely want to talk about this movie because I, I I'm more into this movie now than I was when I first saw it. Okay, let's see now. Well, that's it of the top 25 for in my opinion from 1980. Other movies that are great or that are known that I haven't mentioned that have had some kind of impact. Of course, The Empire Strikes Back. That was a big hit, and I think that was the biggest hit of 1980. And let's see what other big hits that maybe I didn't mention in the list. 9 to 5, which I do like. I think is still pretty funny, but I just couldn't include it on the list, unfortunately. Um, God, there's another one. Not uh, Stir Crazy. Stir Crazy with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. To be honest with you, I kind of found that movie to be mediocre. I mostly, the best part about it was, of course, Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, but I still found it to be a bit too long and kind of drags a lot. But I was glad, I'm glad that it was a hit and whatnot. I think a lot of it had to do more with someone lighting themselves on fire, but more than it did with the film itself. But hey, whatever, let's see, what other movies did I feel? Well, Any Which Way You Can with Clint Eastwood, of course. And some of them I haven't seen, so I can't really say. I'm trying to think of other movies that were around at that. Oh, yeah, Coal Miner's Daughter. That came out on my birthday, March 7th. I hadn't seen that in a long time. And if I do see it, maybe I'll put it in the top 25. Who knows? Let's see what else is there. Prom Night, Friday the 13th, and Terror Train. 3 slashers, 2 of them with Jamie Lee Curtis. Friday the 13th, I kind of consider mediocre, but it has a great poster and the marketing of it was pretty cool and it ushered and was successful. It was well done. I'll give it credit. It was well done, but I compare it to Deep Throat. It was a mediocre film, but had great marketing and it came out at the right time, even though there were better movies in its genre. Prom Night, it was okay. Terror Train, it's okay. I really don't give a shit about either one of those movies. I think there was a movie called Phobia. That really sucked, but that's neither here nor there. Trying to think of other big movies that maybe I'm that were known at, but I didn't. Oh yeah, Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon was an okay movie, but I was more into the soundtrack. It's like if I just bought the soundtrack, I really wouldn't have as much use for the movie. But it's okay. It's entertaining. I could see why Ted would reference it. The Long Riders. Oh yeah, that's a really good movie that I didn't put on the list, but maybe I should. I probably will. It's a really entertaining movie with the Carradines and the Quaids and the Keaches playing like the younger gang, whatever. It feels more like an action film more than it does a western, but that probably has more to do with the director Walter Hill than it really does with anything else. That's a good movie. That's entertaining, bloody. I mean, it's never a dull moment. And I'm trying to see what else we got. Mother's Day, not a bad movie, but not quite top 25 for me. Um, it didn't quite grab me as other later trauma movies did, but I would say it's worth checking out. I think it will, it does have a following, so that's that's all good. There are a couple of other 1980 Italian horror movies that are not quite in the top 25, but they're 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 okay. Some of them. One of them is called, I think, what the hell is it called? Um, Not Nightmare Alley. Maybe it is. And there's that one that's called, I think, Contamination, which is a ripoff of Alien. And that one kind of sucks. It's kind of boring. I mean, even though you see aliens causing people's stomachs to explode and you see mice explode and all, it's still a pretty boring movie and it's not really worth discussing at this time or probably ever. um wow, I'm trying to think, did Dr. Butcher or the Zombie Holocaust come out in 1980 or was that 81? Now that one's enjoyable. That one I definitely would recommend if it came out in 1980. But then I'm trying to think of, yeah, Coal Miner's Daughter, and I mean, Raging Bull was a big one. And I can't even think of that many. But the ones that I've mentioned, I think are if they're not mainstream classics, they're cult classics. And they're definitely favorites of mine. And they seem to have an impact in film history, at least some of them do. Okay, well, I think that's all I have time for today or tonight or whatever. And I hope you enjoyed. And if you have any questions or have any recommendations or comments, talk to me and we'll see if we can move things along. Have a wonderful night.